My name is Della, and I am 29 years old. I signed the deed to a condemned textile warehouse on the worst Wednesday of my adult life. The same afternoon, my divorce attorney filed the paperwork that officially ended my 6-year marriage. My father-in-law laughed so hard when he found out that he had to set his Scotch glass down. My mother-in-law sent me a text that said, simply, "Truly the saddest thing I've ever seen." And my husband, the man I had spent half a decade quietly propping up inside a company he barely understood, told me I would be bankrupt within 3 months and crawling back for a settlement revision before summer. What none of them knew was what I had already found inside that building. 7 days after I took possession of that property, I uncovered something locked in the basement behind a rusted steel door that did not just change my situation. It handed me the legal weapon to dismantle everything they had spent 30 years constructing. But you need to understand how we got here first, because context is everything in a story about people who believed they were untouchable. I grew up in Columbus, Ohio, the daughter of a high school history teacher and a woman who ran a small catering operation out of our garage. We were not wealthy. But we worked hard, and I graduated near the top of my accounting program at Ohio State, which is how I ended up interning at a commercial real estate development firm during my junior year. The firm belonged to my father-in-law. I did not fall in love with the company. I fell in love with the numbers, the architecture of a balance sheet, the way a deteriorating portfolio could be restructured into something lean and sustainable. That kind of puzzle felt like a language only I could read fluently. My father-in-law recognized that early and offered me a full-time position before I even graduated. Within 2 years, I was running the firm's entire financial analysis division. I was also by then engaged to his son. My husband was everything his father had wanted on the surface: charming, well-dressed, the kind of man who could walk into a room of hostile investors and make them feel like they had been let into an exclusive event. He was also almost entirely incapable of reading a financial model without help. He knew it. I knew it. His father knew it too, but that knowledge never changed the way any of them operated. My husband was the face. I was the engine. For the first 3 years of our marriage, I told myself that arrangement was fine, that strong partnerships are built on complementary strengths, that I did not need my name on the press releases to find meaning in the work. I was wrong about all of it. The company had been in serious trouble when I arrived. My father-in-law's flagship project had run 60% over budget and was losing cash fast. 3 major lenders were threatening to pull their lines of credit. I spent the better part of my first year quietly restructuring the company's debt, renegotiating terms with 2 of the 3 lenders, and identifying underperforming assets that could be sold off to stabilize the balance sheet. I worked nights. I worked weekends. I missed our first anniversary trip because I was closing a refinancing deal that saved the company approximately $4 million in penalty interest. My father-in-law thanked me for that exactly once. He mentioned it over dinner, called it good support work, and then spent the next 20 minutes explaining how my husband's relationship building had kept the lender warm enough for negotiations to succeed. I smiled. I ate my meal. I told myself it did not matter. It mattered more than I admitted. By my 5th year, I had built a financial reporting system from scratch that gave the company real-time cost visibility on every project, something that had previously taken 4 weeks and 2 outside consultants to produce. My father-in-law used that system to pitch a major expansion to a consortium of institutional investors. The investor brief was 9 pages. I wrote all of it over 6 weeks. My name appeared nowhere on the cover. My husband's name appeared in 3 places. Still, I stayed. Still, I believed that the ownership stake my father-in-law had promised me for years would eventually materialize if I was patient enough. The morning I understood the truth was not dramatic. My father-in-law called me into his office on a Tuesday and explained, in a voice carrying zero apology, that he was restructuring the company's ownership before the next capital raise. He said the institutional investors needed a clean family succession narrative. He said my name on the equity table. As a soon-to-be divorced woman, he added, as if this were common knowledge I simply hadn't received yet, complicated that story. I sat very still and asked him what he meant by soon-to-be divorced. He told me that my husband had come to him 3 weeks earlier, that together they had decided the marriage had run its course, that the divorce would be handled discreetly, that the company would cover my legal fees as a goodwill gesture, and that I would receive a severance package equivalent to 6 months of salary. 6 months. For 6 years of work that had saved the firm somewhere north of $11 million by my own conservative accounting. I did not raise my voice. My father-in-law had a particular contempt for emotional women that I had observed across years of board meetings. A slow exhale, a fractional narrowing of the eyes, the instant withdrawal of any remaining goodwill. I refused to hand him that moment. I nodded, stood, picked up my portfolio, and walked out of his office without another word. The divorce settlement, after negotiation, amounted to $68,000, and a sedan that was almost paid off. Not what I had earned, not what I deserved, but enough to move, enough to start, and, if I was precise about it, just enough to purchase a piece of property I had been watching for 18 months. The warehouse sat on the eastern edge of an industrial corridor the city had quietly rezoned for mixed-use development 2 years prior. It was a 3-story textile building from the 1940s, red brick gone gray with grime, 2 of its loading dock doors permanently stuck open. The bank holding the foreclosure note had listed it 4 times without a buyer. The asking price had dropped so many times that by the time I made my offer, I was paying less per square foot than some people spend on a security deposit. My father-in-law heard about the purchase within 48 hours. I received my mother-in-law's text that same evening. My husband called the following morning, not to check on me, but because he was apparently concerned I might be acting out in a way that could reflect poorly on the family. Those were his exact words. I hung up before he finished the sentence. I was having coffee at the counter. I moved into the warehouse the following Monday with a sleeping bag, a camping lantern, an industrial extension cord, and enough instant coffee to carry me through a month of early mornings. The building was worse than the inspection report suggested. The second floor had a partial ceiling collapse. Every ground-level window was either boarded or broken. The industrial heating system had not run in over a decade, and the entire east wall smelled like the river sitting 300 yards behind the property line. I spent the first 3 days clearing debris by hand. Bag after bag of shattered glass, collapsed shelving, the remnants of whatever the previous tenants had abandoned when the bank padlocked the doors. On the 4th day, I found the stairs to the basement. They were behind a false wall panel in what had once been the building supervisor's office. A narrow steel door covered over with cheap drywall that had swollen and cracked so completely it barely qualified as a wall anymore. I was having coffee at the counter. I had been pulling it apart to check for mold when the corner of a door frame emerged from the plaster dust. I stood there for a moment, with my crowbar in my hand, staring at it. The door itself was heavy commercial steel, hinged inward, secured with a combination padlock so corroded that the shackle had essentially fused to the body over time. I bought an angle grinder the next morning and cut through it in under an hour. The basement was dry. That was the first thing that surprised me, given the river smell upstairs and the age of the building. Someone had at some point installed a proper drainage system and a passive moisture barrier along the concrete walls. The space was roughly the size of a 2-car garage, metal shelving along 3 walls, mostly empty, a workbench, an old filing cabinet. And in the far corner, sitting on a wooden pallet to keep it off the floor, a large flat-topped metal trunk with a combination dial lock set into the lid. I am not a superstitious person, but I will tell you that the moment I saw that trunk, something in my chest went very quiet and very focused. The same way it did when I was 20 minutes into a complicated financial model and began to sense that the numbers were about to show me something significant. I spent 2 hours trying combinations before calling a locksmith, a retired man who operated out of a converted workshop about 20 miles east of the city. He charged me $200 cash, drove out to the property, and had the trunk open in 40 minutes using a drill, a magnetic probe, and a modified dental pick. He lifted the lid, looked at the contents, and said, "That's a lot of paper." He was not wrong. The trunk contained 12 accordion files, rubber-banded and labeled in pencil, and a flat cardboard sleeve sealed with wax the size of a large poster tube. The accordion files were full of original survey records, municipal filings, and real estate instruments dating from 1941 through 1979. The cardboard sleeve, when I carefully split the wax seal and unrolled its contents on the workbench, contained 4 large-format architectural survey drawings on linen paper, the kind of precise, meticulous drafting that predated digital tools by half a century. I sat down on the concrete floor and began to read. What I found over the next 4 hours rewrote every calculation I had made about my situation. The man who had originally built and owned this warehouse, a local industrialist whose name appeared on document after document, had been extraordinarily careful about one specific thing during his decades of operating here. He had filed and recorded, at the county level, a set of commercial access easements that bound every parcel of land abutting the eastern industrial corridor to his property. The easements were permanent and irrevocable, recorded under a grandfathered municipal instrument that predated the city's modern zoning framework entirely. In plain language, any vehicle, any utility line, any infrastructure that needed to cross from the main highway into the eastern corridor was legally required to pass through a 16-foot access strip running along the southern edge of my property. My 16-foot access strip. I knew the eastern corridor. I had run the financial models on it for my father-in-law's firm. 3 weeks before my divorce was finalized, his company had announced the largest development project in its history, a $180 million luxury mixed-use campus called Eastgate Commons, a hotel, a retail plaza, high-end residential units, a parking structure on 46 acres directly east of my building. All of it accessible from exactly one direction. Mine. I sat on the basement floor of a condemned warehouse with a 40-year-old survey document in my hands, and I began to understand precisely what I was holding. I did not tell anyone, not yet. I hired a commercial real estate litigator the following week, not the attorney I had used for my divorce, but a woman known in the industry for being methodical, aggressive, and completely indifferent to social pressure. Her retainer took the last of my settlement. She reviewed the documents for 3 hours in her downtown office, while I drank bad coffee from a paper cup and waited. When she looked up, she did not smile. But there was something in her expression that I recognized, the look of someone who has found a number that changes everything. She told me the easements were valid, properly recorded, never extinguished, never challenged. She told me that no development of the scale my father-in-law was proposing could legally proceed without securing access rights from the owner of my parcel. Without that access strip, the site was landlocked. No trucks, no utilities, no emergency vehicle access. The zoning approvals his team had already received were built on an assumption nobody had bothered to verify. She asked what I wanted to do with that information. I told her to wait until the groundbreaking event, In the meantime, the harassment started. My father-in-law was not subtle about it. A city inspector appeared at my property 8 days after my divorce was finalized and began issuing violation notices for issues so trivial that 2 of them cited code sections that had been repealed in 2018. A utility crew disconnected my temporary power hookup the following week, citing a permitting irregularity my attorney confirmed did not exist. My husband called twice, not to apologize but to relay offers. His father would pay $60,000 for the warehouse outright, then $80,000, then a vague reference to what the family's legal team could do to complicate my standing if I kept antagonizing them. I documented every interaction, every badge number, every truck plate, every phone call recorded with my attorney's guidance. I had spent 6 years keeping meticulous records for people who underestimated me. Old habit. The night of the groundbreaking, I wore a charcoal blazer and had my hair done properly for the first time in 6 weeks. My attorney met me in the hotel lobby at 7, carrying a leather portfolio with 4 certified copies of the easement documents and a sealed court filing. The ballroom was exactly what my father-in-law preferred. Tall ceilings, low lighting, waitstaff in black vests with champagne. A scale model of Eastgate Commons sat lit from beneath in the center of the room. My father-in-law stood at the front looking exactly as he always did, like a man who had never seriously considered the possibility that he might lose. My mother-in-law spotted me first. She was mid-sentence with someone I did not recognize, and the color drained from her face so quickly that the other woman actually reached out and touched her arm. My mother-in-law extracted herself from that conversation in under 10 seconds. My husband saw me a moment later from across the room. He set his drink down and started toward me with the focused walk of someone intending to remove a problem before it became visible. He did not make it in time. My father-in-law turned as he always did, a room scan out of professional habit, and found me standing there. The expression on his face moved through confusion first, then hardened into something colder. I watched him process the variable he had believed he had already eliminated. My attorney stepped forward before my husband reached us. She introduced herself by name and firm to the nearest city council member and said in a conversational tone that carried clearly to the 3 investors standing within earshot, "I represent the owner of the commercial parcel at the southern access point of the Eastgate corridor. I'd welcome a few minutes of everyone's time after the presentation." The room recalibrated, subtly, but I knew the signs. When the presentation reached the slide on site access and infrastructure, I raised my hand. My father-in-law acknowledged me with the tolerant expression of a man managing a minor disruption. I asked the architect to walk us through how vehicular and utility access to the site was structured, specifically, the southern corridor access point. The architect glanced at my father-in-law. I saw the slight shake of his head, a signal I had watched him use across 100 meetings to indicate that the subject should be closed. The architect said the access routing was still being finalized with city planning. I said, "That's interesting because the access routing runs across a commercial easement that belongs to me, and it has for 80 years. My attorney was already moving. She placed certified copies directly into the hands of the lead institutional lender's representative, the 2 city council members, and the project's legal counsel, a man I recognized from industry events who in that moment looked exactly like someone who has heard ice crack beneath his feet. The room went still in the particular way. Rooms go still when money is suddenly in question. My father-in-law came to the edge of the stage. His voice was level, but I could see his hand on the podium. He said this was a legal matter that would be resolved through proper channels and had no bearing on the project. I said, "It prevents the project." Without access through my property, the site is legally landlocked. No trucks, no utilities, no emergency vehicle access. The zoning approval your team received assumes an access corridor you do not have the right to use. The lender's representative had opened the documents. He was reading. He flagged something on the second page to his colleague. My father-in-law looked at me the way he had looked at me across 1,000 conference tables, with the settled expectation that I would ultimately defer. 6 years of conditioning, 6 years of making myself smaller so that his company could expand. I did not defer. My husband stepped forward from the side of the room, his face red, past the point of managing appearances. He said the documents were fabricated. He said I was acting out of bitterness after a difficult divorce. He said several other things that were recorded on at least 3 separate phones belonging to people in that room who had no reason to believe him and every financial reason to be alarmed. One of the city council members asked my father-in-law directly whether his legal team had reviewed the easement records during due diligence. The silence that followed was its own answer. The lender's representative stood, straightened his jacket, and excused himself to make a call. He did not come back. By 10 o'clock, 2 of the 3 institutional investors had formally communicated withdrawal of commitments pending legal review. The city's planning liaison placed a temporary hold on the access permit. My father-in-law left through a side exit. My mother-in-law, for the first time in my memory, left without speaking to anyone. My husband found me in the lobby afterward. He was pale and very quiet. He asked me what I wanted. I told him I did not want anything from the family. I wanted a permanent recorded commercial access lease for the easement at a rate my attorney had already calculated. I wanted a lump sum payment of $800,000, supported by 6 years of documented financial work the company had profited from without proper compensation, and I had the paper trail organized and ready for review. And I wanted a formal public acknowledgement filed with the county recorder's office, a documented record of my contribution to the firm's financial recovery. He said his father would never agree to that. I said, then the project sits landlocked and the investors sue for their deposits back. That's his choice. My father-in-law called my attorney the following morning. The negotiation took 11 days. The access lease was signed and recorded. The lump sum was wired in 2 installments. The public acknowledgement was filed as part of the corporate restructuring that followed. Because the firm did not survive the capital collapse intact, it was absorbed by a larger regional developer at a fraction of its former valuation. My husband took a position out of state. My mother-in-law did not call. That was fine. I used the first installment to begin renovating the warehouse properly. I hired a structural engineer, a contractor I found through an industry contact, and a commercial design firm I had admired from a distance for years. 18 months after that Wednesday when I signed 2 deeds simultaneously, one for a marriage ending and one for a condemned building beginning, my warehouse opened as a mixed-use creative and commercial hub, a culinary incubator, a small production company, an architect's studio, a photography collective, every unit leased before renovation was complete. The Eastern Corridor development eventually moved forward under new ownership with a different access arrangement and a different team. My easement lease income arrives on the 1st of every month, direct deposit, like clockwork. I sat on the roof of my building last spring, with a folding chair I had dragged up through the hatch and a cup of good coffee, looking at the city skyline I had earned every inch of. My attorney had sent over the quarterly lease statement that morning. I read it twice, not because I needed to, but because I have always found something deeply satisfying about numbers that tell the right story. My father-in-law had called me support staff. My husband had called me a liability. My mother-in-law had called my purchase the saddest thing she had ever seen. I had called it the only investment I ever needed to make in myself. It turned out that was the most accurate financial analysis of my career.